Uh,
I remember when we very first caught up on my other podcast, Relax Running. Dean Huffer, who put me
mm,
on to you, physiotherapist here in Melbourne, said you're not going to meet a more interesting bloke, especially when you look at his calendar. He goes, he opens his diary, and it's just something from sort of 6 a.m. till 9 p.m. or whenever it is that he finishes. And you just told me before I hit record that today was supposed to be a day off, and you run around as it is. What's been on the schedule today?
I've had a couple of people for tennis today and done their speed agility. We do a lot of work now. Just accelerative sort of speed is a lot of work I do. So I've also had a meeting with one of my athletes, and we've structured up their program. And then I've had a very interesting meeting actually with a lady who's in her 80s, and she'll go nameless, but she's the wife or widow now of a very prominent New South Wales politician, but she loves her running. And we meet up every now and then and talk about her running and what she's got to do. And for an individual now, she's approaching her 80s, and she wants to run her best times for that age category. And she's as driven as any athlete I've ever worked with. So, I find it very motivating. And I don't really want anyone to know, but I've actually never worked a day in my life. And when you sit down with someone like that, it just reinforces how blessed I am, to call that my job. It's great and very inspiring. I love it.
What event is she training for? Is she a sprinter or a distance
Yeah,
runner?
100 and 200. And her big thing today was she's been told that strength training, in particular power cleans, could really help her. So it's interesting. And I'm not laughing at her. I just think it's amazing that she's so motivated to want to investigate what she can do to move forward.
It's awesome. I've actually been listening to a book called Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but he's a sort of a health span, lifespan coach, I guess is the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he says is a lot of people have this idea that when they get into their 80s and 90s, they still want to be able to function. And he said, okay, but let's have a look at your life now, and we'll put you on a little bit of a course, and imagine it's a graph. So if you want to be able to carry your groceries home from the shops when you're 85, right now you need to be able to have a maximum grip of, X kilos, or be able to hold your body weight for a certain amount of time, and you can't do that. So one of the first things that he'll do for people is start to get them on a little bit of an action plan, which says, okay, if this is where you want to be in 50 years, where do you need to be now? And a lot of us just nowhere near where we think we should be in order to be where we would like to be. So it's
Yeah.
inspiring when you hear stories like that. Yeah, I get it. You laugh not because we're laughing at her, but just because it's so out of the ordinary. You hear someone in such good shape at that age.
I think too, and it's a bit deep and meaningful, especially now. It's a poignant day. I'm not sure when people are listening to this podcast, but this is the day. Yesterday, we found out that Matty Rendell, a very famous person in Australian football, passed away suddenly from a heart attack. And he's not that old; he's in his 60s. And only last week, whilst I didn't talk to him, I did say hello to him. We were at a funeral or a memorial session for Craig Stewart, who again isn't very old, and really you've live today like it's the last day you've got, because we really don't know what's coming, and make the most of the time you've got. So having an 80-year-old wanting to power clean, that's pretty inspiring.
It was actually listening to Peter Attia's book that made me reach out to you originally, because I know you've got your hand right into the elite performance sport. So for those of you who don't know, Quinny, you could probably describe it better who you're working with. I think you're working, you said, with the Penrith Panthers as well as the GWS Giants here in the AFL.
Yeah, the Panthers are down in Melbourne this week playing the Storm, so that'll be a big game. So I've been with the Panthers now for a couple of years. I look after speed agility, and every now and then I'll do individual work with the players. And I've really enjoyed my time, or I'm enjoying my time with Penrith. I'm with the Giants as well, so I spend a couple of days a week with GWS. I've got a pretty good squad of athletes that I work with and see them a few days a week. Another job that's probably a bit left of centre, I've been there now for 7 years. I just spend one day a week at a private school here, Scots College. And Scots, for those Melbourne listeners, is the brother school of Scotch. And I mentor the boys there. So nothing to do with sport, nothing to do with education. It's the Year 12 boys, and they're doing a special program. And I will sit down with them one-on-one for an hour, and we'll just talk about where they're at with their life and what's going on, and we talk about the challenges they've got from not being able to understand or communicate with the teacher to the issues they're having at the school, through to home problems, marriage breakdowns, personal relationship issues, self-identity problems, life issues, study problems, who knows? And my role is to listen and then put them into the direction that they need. But the most rewarding aspect of that role is only this week I've got about 3 emails from the boys who one's goal, he wanted to be able to work overseas in finance, and he's got a photo of himself outside the New York Stock Exchange with a sign, "I've made it." It's great.
That's unreal. Yeah, because by degree, you're an exercise physiologist, aren't you? But I
Yeah,
guess just working hand in hand with athletes, naturally, the psychological side of performance is if not as important. I mean, it is arguably more important, or at least at the very least, as important as the physical training. So just by default, that would come into the conversation of training and performance anyway, wouldn't it?
Look, coaching's multifaceted, and as a coach, you wear many hats. And yes, I'm a sports scientist, and I've done all the nerdy subjects at university. But even in doing those, my worst subjects when I was studying at school were the science subjects and mathematical subjects. I was more a humanities person, and so it's interesting that my career has taken me down a science path, but I treat it from a humanity point of view. So I say it quite often to people that I don't coach footballers, I don't coach athletes, I coach people. And to get the most out of a person, you look at all aspects of their life to allow them to come through. Now, one significant aspect of that is their ability to move. And so the biomechanics is so important, and their strength is so important, and being able to run with correct coordination and speed and power, all those things vital, of course. But it doesn't mean jack if you haven't got your head in the right space and your heart's not in the right space. So it's very important to be able to relate to people on those 3 grounds. And look, that's not for everybody, but I found it's very effective. And look, at the end of the day, I'm not coaching for anyone other than the athletes I work with, and I'm true to me. You've got to be authentic, and that's me. I coach people, and I work with them on a physical level, I work with them on a mental level, and I work with them on a spiritual level. And spiritual, someone might think, oh God, we're getting all deep and meaningful and religious. But if I stand at the race at half time before we take the field and we're down by 4 goals, and I say, for God's sake, you blokes, show me a bit of spirit, would you? This pathetic, that first half. Let's go. I'm not asking anyone to fall on their knees and bless themselves. I'm asking them to look within themselves to what is it that makes you who you are, what defines you. That, to me, is your spirit. So how do you bring the spirit out of a person? And it's multifaceted. And I've learned a lot over the last 5 or 6 years. I've been working with a number of refugees at track and field athletes, and the stories they've got. And you might redefine spirit as resilience and commitment and hope and optimism. Well, it's all of those things. And again, I find that quite inspiring. It helps me to help them.
Have you seen the documentary? I don't know if you've got time for it, Quinny, but there's one that's just come out, an 8-part series on Netflix, The Tour Unchained.
No, I haven't. No.
I recommend it. I was talking to another running coach this morning about it, and it's interesting that you mentioned the physical, the mental, and the spiritual side of performance, because essentially, for those of you who haven't seen it, the documentary, it follows each team, or about 5 of the major contenders for the Tour de France through the 2022 tour. And it looks at not only the courses, it looks at their recent form, it looks at how they've gone the day before, it follows some of the treatment. It's really interesting from the mindset or perspective of an elite athlete, just to see how it is that they function. But one thing that becomes really apparent really quickly is how much that spiritual side, to steal your phrase, stands out. And
Oh,
it's usually, as you say, in a moment. There was one episode, I watched episode 7 today, and there was a particular rider he was a French rider. I'm trying to think of his name, but it was his first time being offered the opportunity to actually go out there and shoot for a podium finish. And with about 5 stages to go, he fell way off the back. He started to question his form, and then just got a tune up by their club leader, not only him, but the rest of the team. And just to hear him speak about what his intentions were for the next week and why they were his intentions, and just to see the way that he attacked the race, I mean, spiritual seems like a pretty good word to describe what it is that they're going through, because I guess you're challenged physically and mentally to such a point that I guess that's the next level above both of those things.
Oh, look, you talk to people talk about runners, and you talk about a runner's high. I think runner's high is when your mental, physical, and spiritual all align. That's when you hit your sweet spot for running, and it happens in any number of sports. The but we're only interested in running, so that's where you hit it most. And whether it's the distance runner that's euphoric as they're running, or the sprinter that's going at their maximum velocity, yet they feel like everything's in slow motion and they can take every nuance of what's going on around them. That's the true essence of running, and that's the true essence of sport. I think when all of those things align, it defines why we do it.
Yeah, I was speaking to my wife, Jessie, just I don't know if it was today or yesterday, but I've essentially been on a 6 month journey of just navigating my way through bloody calf strains. And Quinny, some of that I'm ashamed to admit has just been a lack of knowledge and understanding of actually how to do it, and no research. Just thinking, yeah, I think I feel good. Get back into it. I think I'm back onto a winning formula. I'm trying to get ready for the Melbourne Marathon in
Look,
October this year.
I'm a big fan of hope and optimism, but sometimes you've got to divert back to logic.
Yeah, that's right.
You
I
can convince yourself this is right and I'm okay, but no, look, you do have to sometimes strip it back and go through it. And look, when I work clinically as an exercise physiologist, so I come down there to Melbourne every month doing that. That's really what you've got to do most times is just look back at where people are. And injuries, people say they're bad luck. There's very, very few instances is an injury bad luck. It's usually of your own making. You may not want to admit it, but it's usually linked to it's terrible load, poor training venues, so the surfaces aren't right, or you're doing too much, or you're not recovering enough, or a combination of all of those things. You've got to strip that back. But what I find with a lot of the athletes I work with is that it comes down to posture. And once you strip that back, you have a look at that. I actually have been using an app now, both in a clinic setting and with coaching, and it's I don't get any plugs for it, so there's no return for me. But it's called Yoga, Yogger, and you just basically point your phone or your iPad at the individual, and it will give you all the biomechanical markers. It does it, and it can show you where your imbalances are and so on. And I found that really powerful. I've got a girl that I'm coaching at the moment. She's actually a refugee from Afghanistan, and English is, I don't even think it's a second language. I think it's about a 10th. And communication can be really challenging, but a picture says 1,000 words. So when I put this in front of her, it just makes instant sense, and away we go. So that's a really simple way, but you can use it while you're videoing, or you can take photos with it, and it does the mechanical analysis for you. Really powerful stuff.
Wow. So is that something that's used just for athletes, or is that something that a person on the street who's just trying to improve posture um, can use to make little changes there?
You could do anyone could do that and have a look at it. I feel that for me, for what I do, it sort of pays for itself because I'm using it with, in the clinic setting, and I'm using it with my athletes, and that's my livelihood. I don't know if I was just doing that for fun, but look, if it saves you from an injury and 3 weeks of, well, it depends on how you value things. It's not really that expensive anyway. I couldn't tell you how much it is off the top of my head, but it's a very effective little app, and I do use it quite a lot.
So when you've got the video or the camera on one of your athletes or one of the patients that have come in to see you, is it giving you, as sort of the physiologist, pointers on what it thinks are a few standout points, or does it just
No,
show?
no,
No. So
you
okay.
to have a look at that. But it's amazing when you remove the body from it and you're just looking at dots, you can see the malalignment of the individual. It's so obvious to you that one shoulder's sitting up like this, yet when you're looking at a body, it's not quite, especially your own, you can't see for looking. But the actual dots that it puts on the key anatomical points, it's as clear and evident as you could want it to be. Yeah, it's a
Gee.
great little tool.
I can imagine some of that would be genetic, like the posture. My wife, well, I don't know if this is genetic. My wife had a problem with really mild scoliosis a few years ago, and she got on an exercise program with Karen Holzer,
Yeah.
and she sort of pointed her in the right direction, and it had stopped a whole heap of headaches and things for her. But what are some of the reasons that people are out of whack like that? What
Oh,
causes it?
mate, it's a lifestyle. Go down to the local shopping mall and just sit down there for 10 minutes and look around you. Even you go to a coffee shop, and most people are looking down because they've got their mobile phones in front of them, so they're like this, and their heads on this on an angle. You know, your head weighs about 5 to 6 kilos, but when you put it on to this tilt like that, it goes up to more than 27 kilos. So you've got that weight going into your spine, top of your spine. And then, the young kids, they're students, so they're spending a lot of time writing or on their keyboards working. So their posture's in that position here like that, which we call kyphotic. So they're like that. Well, that puts stress on further down the back. And if you're then going to go out and do some running, that loads down your hamstring. So the thing we need to do is strengthen that. And I've used this term a lot, and I'm not sure who to really attribute it to, so I'll claim it, but it's really not mine. But you've got to strengthen what you stretch and stretch what you strengthen. So if you're in this position, you've got to stretch your front out and strengthen your back out to take you back into this posture so that you're more upright. And that will take the load off your back, but you'll be able to run better. People, especially the boys I've got coming in, for running or even in the clinic, they want to have a bigger chest and they're wondering, how much should I have to bench? Well, half the problem, it's not a bench. They need to work on their back so that their chest actually gets in the right position. So, but yeah, posture is key for me. So work on that. I see posture as like the launch pad for performance. Think of a rocket and you're shooting for the stars. Well, you want a pretty good launch pad for that rocket. Well, my rocket are the athletes that I work with, whatever sport they're in. So I've got to make sure my launch pad is as solid as it possibly can be. And that starts with things like posture. It starts with things like their movement, their basic movement patterns, and the coordination patterns, and so on. So get all those things in place, and then the rest becomes relatively easy.
Yeah, I've been driving down to Melbourne. I'm in Point Lonsdale, so it's about an hour and a half on a good
Mm,
day each way. And I've been doing that about 3 days a week for maybe the last 12 months. And at home, a lot of the time my work is done. I've got a stand up desk and I'm trying to be more, I am fairly conscious of it. Like the majority of my training is I'll do some strength, I'll do flexibility and some form of cardio. I'm starting to introduce a little more stability and just keeping things
mm,
fun, just trying to keep it interesting to me. Not a whole heap of coordination, which is something I guess that's in another category, but something I'm trying to stay on top of just as my young boy gets older so I can still beat him at one-on-one basketball. But driving down to Melbourne, for the first time a little while ago, I noticed that my coccyx had
mm,
developed like a little bit of a dull pain. And I went to the gym like I always do each Wednesday, and I was going through my deadlift routine. Went through a warm up set, and I felt like a little bit. It felt slightly weak just at the lower part of my back, and I thought, okay, I'll take it easy. So I went up to 70 kilos, which is usually I'll sort of push towards 90, or on a good day maybe 100 for some of the reps, and went to 70, which should have been comfortable. And after about the second rep, I just felt this. At the time, I had no idea what it was. The next day, I realized it was a strain,
mm.
and oh my goodness, like the just the lack of function or the function that you lose through an injury like that absolutely blew my mind. But it was sort of a double faceted interest point to me because the first thing was I think the weakness had developed when I'd just been spending so much time in a weird position in the car. And
Mm.
then also just having a bit of a wake up call as to how important spinal health is. I mean, they're two things that I probably knew, but I'd never really experienced directly.
No,
And it took about a month.
no, I see it a lot. I mean, everyone knows it, but not very many people actually understand. And it's very difficult to understand unless you're experiencing it firsthand. And look, it's probably not from sitting in the car. That just highlights or exacerbates the condition that you've got. But a lot of it comes from, again, lack of strength in your postural muscles of your low back. So strengthening those muscles. I hear people say, oh, I don't do strength work because I'm a distance runner. I don't want to get big. Well, it's not about being a distance runner. You don't understand strength training. You don't have to get big doing strength training. Strength training doesn't have to equate to being a bodybuilder. So
Mm.
you need to strengthen those muscles through there. Uh, One of my favourite forms of strength is actually Pilates. And Pilates is really underrated, I think, for track athletes, particularly endurance-based athletes, because it's really postural and movement, and it's about elongating muscle length. It's actually strength training for ballet dancers, but it translates very well for runners. But again, we spend a lot of our time in flexion. So flexion's when you're like seated and think like an L, that's flexion. But when we perform, we're in extension. So that's a straight line and pushing back behind you. So again, from a training, a coaching point of view, I really enjoy giving my athletes things like hills and sleds. And people think, oh, you just like that because it gets them fit. Yes, it does get them fit and strong, but it also it exaggerates that position of extension and movement through that full range, which is what we're trying to get. So maybe if you are experiencing that, I'd be talking to you about, without having a look at what's going on from a postural point of view, all of that's okay, I'd be then looking at how do we strengthen your postural muscles of your lower back. I wouldn't be doing deadlifts for strengthening that, even though that is one. I wouldn't go there if you're having issues. And then I'd be getting you doing activities like towing a sled, or hill runs, just a gentle hill. When I talk about hill, I'm not talking about like Anderson Street Hill where you're slogging up the hill. Just a 10-degree gradient is all you need.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it was really interesting. I during lockdown, it was here in Melbourne. When the gyms were closed, Alice Bakey. I'm not sure if you know who that is. She's a running Pilates instructor. She's a friend of mine. She's been on the Relaxed Running podcast a couple of times, and she invited me to come onto a course with her, or a Zoom call where she had about 20 girls. And I'd been a regular in the gym for the last 5 or 6 years before this. So I thought, oh, this would be cute. Like big strong guy like myself will come in and just show them how it's done. And Quinny, I think you know what's coming. It was unbelievable how many points of weakness I had in my body that I just had no idea existed. It's still, even as you say that, I've taken a mental note to maybe introduce it into the week of training again. But I think I've become so ritualized with the three things that I mentioned before: the yoga, the strength, and the running, or the aerobic work, that I just haven't really considered where to fit it into a training. Like, would you, with that routine, I'm sort of doing one or two things every day as it is, would you substitute a gym session for a Pilates session?
I would do that. So it'd be the midweek session. I'd put that in because it is a strength session. It's just a different expression of that. You've just got to be careful if you're only doing a couple of sessions a week of the other strength, that you're not going to get the adaptation. So I'd do two, say, your normal, if you want to call it that, in the gym-based strength, and one of the Pilates. Yeah. I first got introduced to Pilates when I was working with the Institute of Sport down in Tasmania, and one of the physios there was quite big into it, and I'd never heard of it. And I was applying that to my track squad down there, and I learned a lot about it. And then when I came to the Bombers in 1998, I had no real involvement with AFL up until that point at all. And some of the players were getting, you know, odd injuries. Like it's not so odd, it's actually making a bit of a resurgence, is osteitis pubis, where there's an inflammation around the pubic bone. And I introduced Pilates to Essendon Footy Club back in 1999. And I can remember Kevin Sheedy looking at the program, he's going, what the hell's Pilates? but it's a common thing now in all footy clubs, of whatever the code, and across the globe. I think it's a great methodology for strength, and even when I referred earlier to some of the clinical patients that I've got, whilst they're not going to a Pilates class, a lot of the strength aspects of my programs are Pilates based in what I'm prescribing. So one would be they have a TheraBand, and they're doing getting to a sit-up position, and you're just going to cycle your legs, just push your foot out like a runner, but hold a TheraBand above your chest with tension. So it activates your core, but you've got a running action. I reckon that is a fantastic strengthening exercise for a runner. Guess what? It's born out of Pilates. That's where it comes from. Yeah. But you could do that, this afternoon at home. Just need a TheraBand or something to provide you with some tension.
So you've got you're laying down on your back. You've got your feet.
Yeah, doing like a cycling action, like, just extending your foot. Imagine that you're running, you're lying on the floor on your back, and you've got a running action, just extending one leg after the other, but above you, you're holding a band with tension with your hands. So you're not using your arms in the running action.
So, what other elements are you doing with the clubs that you're working with? I know you said that speed and agility is a big part with the AFL boys. Are you taking care of these other things as well, like in the gym, or is your focus more specifically on the field?
No, more in the field. They've got guys that are doing rehab and that type of thing. I do sports science, and I come up with crazy ideas really for GWS especially. I was talking to Nick Poulos, he's the high performance manager at the Giants. We're having a bit of a laugh. I think laterally, and so sometimes I'm thinking so far laterally, I meet myself around the back. It's sort of a bit of a nutter, but it's good. Like one of the things I'm actually looking at the moment, like as an extension of Pilates, this could be the biggest load of crap you've heard for 6 months, but is bungee fitness, and I've seen them with them in shopping centres with young kids. But it's just like a bungee thing, and you're running. But they've now started to use that in different places overseas for non-impacting fitness and conditioning. So if you've got a lower limb injury, that you can do work and you get an enormous workout, especially for posture and for core. So I've actually put that proposal in already for the Giants that we start doing a bit of bungee for our guys who can't do impact. Like it's not that long ago that deload treadmills came in, where you can inflate a bag around you and it takes the impact. So I could have an athlete running at, just 20% of their body weight. It's got its pros and cons. Like I do use it if I need to, but it's got its pros and cons, and it does change the way you run. But look, it's a way of gradually loading. I'm a big fan of deep water running. There's no impact. But the concept of the bungee, where you're in midair and you can do all sorts of different things, it's really activating core. Look, again, training is all about mental and physical. So if an athlete's getting a bit of a buzz from doing different training and it's getting them fit and strong, well, guess what? The old spirituality belief will start to kick in. And so whatever it takes, as long as it's legal, I'm there.
Yeah. So what are you in a harness? I think I've
Yeah,
seen what you're talking about. Is it where you're on a trampoline? They've got the bungee cords either side of the yeah,
they could
connecting to
be
the
they could be
harness.
on a trampoline, or you could just there is a way you can crank it up a little bit so they don't have full impact on the ground. So they can do all sorts of things. You can actually have them running in the air and then just coming back and lightly touching the ground. You can have them do light jumps up. But it's a very much a core and functional control session. So yeah, stay tuned on that. If it looks like it might be okay, I'll come back to you and tell you how effective it's been. I'm just trying to get that one literally, pardon the pun, I'm trying to get it off the ground.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's amazing what we laugh at on one day, and a couple of years later, I mean, like that Kevin Sheedy Palat's example is classic. Probably in the late '90s, 90% of people would have been saying Pilates. It was just a
Yeah.
foreign concept, like something like yoga. But I've noticed this since having kids. My 3-year-old is constantly on the move, and his whole life is just play. And I mean, I heard this stereotype about kids before, but I was having a conversation with one of my comedian friends the other night, just how it's been such a reminder to me to stay fit and healthy so he can continue to just bring that element of play. And it doesn't matter whether he's on a skateboard or whether we're kicking the football or whether he's walking over rocks in bare feet at the beach and just trying to navigate. I feel everything that he's doing is just a benefit to his health. And it's no surprise just looking at him how much shape or fitness or whatever you want to call it we lose as we get older, because pretty much every element of what he does disappears from our life once we get into school and uni and day-to-day life for the most part. I mean, there's exceptions to that, but
Oh, yeah,
yeah, majority of
we place importance on things that, rightly or wrongly, whether they are important, and you talk about the innocence of young kids. I love just observational coaching, if you like, and look at any young kid that, a preschooler, and they just live in the moment. They're not even thinking 30 seconds ahead. It can be dangerous sometimes. Walk with a kid along the street, you've got to be with them because they can get away from you in a flash, because they're not thinking about a consequence of what might happen in 10 or 15 seconds. They think about what is important to me right now. I'm going to do this. And I'd love to have my athletes think like that sometimes. Just be in the moment and focus on what you're going to do at this very point in time. And I'm going to give it 100% effort of everything I've got just because I can. And that's the innocence of youth. And but unfortunately, we start to rationalise as we get older about this is going to hurt. And if I do this, I might get that. And if I don't get that time, then we start thinking consequence. We start thinking outcome, and we focus on the wrong thing, and And you've got to be careful. Like self-talk is so important. I said to these young tennis players I had this morning, you've got to listen to how you're talking. And if you start a sentence with, "Oh, look, I don't think I can do that," you've already said, "I don't," and that you can't do something. So that starts to become what you believe you can do. And
Mm.
I said to you, "Look, we're going to do an exercise now, but I don't want you to think about oranges because today's talk is about apples." What was the first thing that popped into your head? An
Yeah.
orange. So as a coach, I've got to be mindful of how I'm talking to my athlete about what I want them to do and what they are capable of doing, what they will be able to do, what they will feel, what they will see, what they'll experience, not what they can't do and what I don't want them to do. So it's positive coaching versus negative coaching. Yeah, words are very powerful. We've got to be careful how we use them. I read not so long ago that I'm trying to remember who it was that said it, but he said that's why we call it spelling, because words cast a spell on our mind. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, be
Yeah.
very
Well said.
careful.
Well, it's like training, isn't it? It's actually been one thing that I've been trying to be a little more focused on lately, not because I'm incredibly depressed or down in the dumps or anything, but I've just done a bit of a mental check and thought this is one area of my life that I could really improve on. I think the physical training side of things is in a pretty good place. But I mean, the fact it's invisible is probably one of the things that makes it more difficult. But just I find cognitive behavior therapy really helpful, just to develop a little bit more of a positive storyline. Because I think just probably the foundation of it is uh, just the routine maybe of kids. As much as I love it, like, and I wouldn't change it for the world, just sacrificing so much of that free time had been a frustration for me. So I was like, okay, I know in 10 years' time I'm going to look back at this with such sentimental eyes. Like, why not bring that attitude into it right now? And just as a result of bringing that into just being with my boys and trying to challenge some of the negative, or not negative, probably negative takes, I guess, on a situation where it's like, I'd rather be doing my work, just going, okay, I mean, this is like, it's limited time that you get with your kid. And then just through practicing that, being out there at the skate park and constantly challenged, I thought, okay, well, why not try and introduce this throughout my day and just catch myself? And at the moment, I think I'm the equivalent of like a flabby man trying to take up running with my mental talk. There's so many times where and I'm getting a lot better, but there's so many times where I'll catch myself in like this, oh, I shouldn't be doing this now. I wish I could be doing this. That it kind of shocks me. And when you become aware of it, it's really interesting just how much room you have to grow. And I would say that generally I'm a fairly optimistic, positive person. So,
Hmm.
I mean, this is a double-edged sword. Yeah, the same can be applied with exercise. A lot of people probably don't realize how inactive their lifestyles are until they start to implement a little bit of activity into their day-to-day life. You just become more and more aware of it. So, with the self-talk stuff, where do you start an athlete with that?
Asking them what it is they dream about. What do they see their future as? What do they see as successful? Because it's not about myself as the coach, it's about what they want. And once you take on board what your hopes, dreams, aspirations of the person you're working with actually are, then you start pushing them towards that. And I think the most exciting thing is when they don't understand their own potential and you're able to plant seeds so that they slowly but surely understand their future, and you're taking them, you're guiding them towards that. It's a very rewarding part of coaching.
Yeah. Yeah. Apart from, I mean, there's so many elements that come under the umbrella of physical performance and well-being, as
Mm.
we're well aware. What are some other things that you're doing with the guys that you're working with, whether it's the 80-year-old sprinter, the tennis players, the footballers, the whoever it is? Is there anything else that's grabbed your attention at the moment?
Oh, I don't know if it's anything that's really grabbed my attention with them that's probably above and beyond the ordinary. I think that I try to teach each of them as an individual. So it's what comes up from those people. I think you've also got to be careful in there that whilst you're working with all of these people, getting the most out of them. And you were starting to allude to it a moment ago when you were talking about spending time with a young fellow, that, you've got to be careful that you keep growing yourself. You know, when you stop growing, you're dying, and you got to keep moving and looking for different ways. You don't know everything about everything. How is it? How can you keep growing yourself? And for me, I've always come from the arty farty side, the literature side. I love reading, and I've got so much stuff that I'm always trying to take on board. Time is the big thing, and we're talking there about an app for biomechanics and stuff like that. Well, there's so many different things out there now where you can get books and you just listen to them like a podcast and listen to books. And now there's apps out there that are basically around abbreviated books. And you can, I drive into work now, say into Olympic Park. It might be a 20-minute drive, but by the time I've got there, I've absorbed a book, all the key points of a book. And I try to take those key points in, because whether we're talking about success in on the track and getting to the Olympic Games, whether you're talking about success in I just want to shift an extra kilo, whether you're talking about success, I want to get that promotion and become second in charge of that department, whether you're talking about I want to be the best mum that I can possibly be to my kids, whatever you define as success, the rules are the same. And if you're listening to books and business on success, just draw the parallels over the world that's yours. So the name of the latest thing that I found, which I think is really good, is called Headway. So that's another app that I use, and it's just allows me to basically, I'm absorbing 7 books a week, and I'm just taking on a lot of concepts. And I suppose I've got to be careful I don't drown myself in facts and figures and numbers and thoughts and theories, but I love it. And
Yeah,
but
I thought you were going to say Blinkist, which is another one. It sounds very
it's
familiar.
similar,
What's
yeah.
Headway? Is it a sort of a rival
Yes,
brand
yeah,
to Blinkist, I guess?
yeah. And again, I don't have any affiliation with these people. I'm just talking to you like we're down at the pub having a beer. But yeah, no, that's just what I use, and I find it's really effective. I just plug it on in there, and if I'm not listening to SEN on the radio, I'm listening to a book and someone talking about the virtues of goal setting or whatever it is.
What book have you been listening to most recently?
The Oh gee, I've listened to one just this morning, and it was on all about goal setting, and it was called Breaks. And I listened to basically, you name these latest books. I could actually, if you wait a sec, I'll tell you the last books that I've been listening to. Here it is in front of me. No Excuses. I can't say it on your podcast, but
Oh,
it's
you can. I'm sure you can.
Unfuck Yourself.
Yes.
Talking to Strangers, The Power of the Mind, the 80-20 principle, giving yourself time is what that's about. And again, I'm listening to those abbreviations of those books, and if I really like them, like I listened to it first, and I went out and got the book Atomic Habits, and
Oh,
then
great book. Yeah.
it had a workbook that came with it. So I started working through the workbook. Mate, really powerful stuff. And then I can then teach others, the athletes I work with particularly, on how to incorporate that into their lives as well. So yeah, I'm getting good value, and I think my athletes are getting good value out of that as well.
Yeah, so you've got probably even a more efficient system than what I do. My go-to is I'll usually go to Audible. I'm not a member on Headway or Blinkist or anything, though I probably should be by the sound of it. But I'll download a book there, and if I absolutely love it, then I'll keep an eye out for the hard copy book, or I might order it and put it on the shelf. But what was I going to say? You said something then about oh yeah, no, it was Atomic Habits. That was one that stood out to me in a big way, because I'm such a goal setter. I love the idea of goal setting. And James Clear, the author of the book, he goes, "Well, your goals are fantastic, but what a lot of us forget is process."
Yes.
And I love that idea. I was like, "Oh, that's been my missing link," because it's all good to say I want to climb Everest, but maybe I should take a hiking class or whatever it is. And
Well,
I think
for
so
some
many, yeah,
for some people, it's taking one step.
yeah,
You've got
yeah,
to,
for sure. Yeah,
yeah.
it gained a whole heap of traction. I didn't realize how popular that was. I went and listened to quite a few podcasts with the guy as well, because even his story about that, how that book came about, was quite interesting. Just started with a blog and started some put some blogs out there that got really popular. And I can see how it is, because it seems to be one of the struggle points for a lot of people is we've got all these ambitions and dreams, but I guess that key ingredient of process is one that too many of us forget. Whether you, like you say, a mum trying to be a better mum or an athlete trying to make the Olympics, it applies equally to both of us.
Yes, yeah, and to achieve those goals, you've got to have a certain level of selfishness as well. And when you've got responsibilities, whether it be to your family, to your employer, whatever, it's very hard sometimes to then say, no, this is just for me. But you've got to structure your day in such a way that you don't neglect the most important asset you have, and that's you.
Yeah, from your perspective, Quinny, when you look at just the general population, and I can imagine that this it varies far and wide
Mm.
depending on where you're looking, what are elements of just physical, mental performance that so many of us are letting ourselves down with, from a lack of exercise programs to lack of positive self-talk to anything else that you can insert under that umbrella of general well-being?
Oh, I think it's sometimes it's out of fear of failure that people don't set a realistic goal. They either just float. So, oh no, I just want to get fit. I just want to lose weight. So there's nothing measurable on that. So, what does fitness mean? If you've been in hospital for a year, fitness is being able to get out of bed and get down to the bathroom by yourself. But if you might call fitness, I want to be able to complete the City to Surf in Sydney, or I want to do my first marathon. It's so you've got to put something on it, and then quantify what that is. So I think there's a lot of that. I think a lot of people talk about what they want to do, but they don't put any of their ways you're going to measure it, and there's no process about how they're going to get that. And from a coaching point of view, that's part of what I've got to do is make sure I keep my athletes accountable to what we're trying to achieve and keep focused on that.
Yeah, what I liked about you from the first time I met you was we sat down at Olympic Park Sports. Actually, it wasn't Olympic Park Sports Medicine, Sport and Spine. I can never remember the name of the
Yeah.
place. You
South,
in
South Yarra Spine and Sports Medicine.
That's see, it's probably a good thing. I haven't been there enough to have memorised the name just yet, which is a sign of good health, I imagine. But yeah, down there in South Yarra, I remember sitting there with you and you showing me the Aura ring. And to
Yeah,
me, that was the first. This is about 3 years ago now, and it was unbelievable for me to see that, because you showed me what just looked like a pretty standard ring, and then you were
mm,
starting to break down some of the elements of what it can do and how that's beneficial to performance. Um,
yeah. Well,
and
it's,
there's
it's
so many.
yeah, it really helped me. Like I've got it on there. So it just looks like a normal ring, and the Aura ring. I got it because back in 2014, I suffered from an autoimmune disease. So there was no warning. I just got hit with it, and it was limbic encephalitis. So encephalitis is an inflammation of my brain, and the limbic part of it is the most primitive part of the brain. So it's all about memory and things like that, and that really stuffed me. I spent over a year in medical care, and then another 12 months of that after that in supervised care. And there are a lot of specialists and people around the world who the prognosis wasn't very good. In fact, it's got less than a 5% survival rate from the type of thing that I had. And I'd love to say it was my fortitude, it was my resilience, it was my strength, it was my character. It wasn't any of that. It was just God's divine intervention and a bit of luck thrown in on the side that I've come through that. But I've been given an opportunity to go for it again and impact as many lives as I can going forward. But one of those was I needed to get my own life in order, and part of that, what really got affected, and it is a part of the brain in terms of relaxation, but I wasn't sleeping. I was only getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night, and it's not uncommon for me to be up even now at 5 o'clock. But the Aura Ring has really enabled me to measure and understand my sleep patterns and cycles. So I'm now averaging around about 7.5 hours of sleep a night, which for me is fantastic. And it's made a real difference because the harder you work, the harder you need to recover. And the most important part of recovery is actually sleep. And, we have this thing that if you have a nap during the day, that's not a good thing, but it is a good thing. And you let your body regenerate and then go again. Yeah, you've just got to take that time out for yourself. Just like you're taking time for training, you got to take time for resting. And resting isn't sitting in front of the TV watching a movie. It sometimes is just having a good sleep. Get to bed.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, it's always the first thing to go for me. I can tell whenever I've had a bad run of 3 or 4 nights with sleep, it's not uncommon for me to get, usually it's sinusitis or some form of a cold. And this has sort of crept up a couple of times since having kids, because as I'm sure you'd know, there's more than a couple of nights where a good night's sleep just isn't even an option if I want to stay married. I mean, as much as I try and handball it to Jesse and say, you take care of it, that last 10 minutes until I'm out on the couch or in the doghouse or wherever else I need to be. But what? So did you say the autoimmune disease was the reason that you weren't sleeping, or it
Yeah,
was part of
it,
that, one of the
it, it,
consequences?
a consequence of it. It affected that part of my brain, and yes, but it's gradually got better. But one of the other things I've done, I reckon, has been interesting is I've co-supervised a couple of PhD students through Greater Western Sydney Giants and also through University of Western Sydney, and it also came from encephalitis, where I lost a bit of function of my right eye, and it wasn't tracking right. And when I was in hospital, they brought these glasses and they put these glasses on, and they were literally tracking the movement of my eyes. And I had a little epiphany there. Like, imagine how we could use these for sport, because that's tracking your eye movement and whatever. Anyway, sure enough, we can use them for sport. And so we got some in at the Giants, and the supervised study I was involved with was tracking the eye movement for decision making. And when I looked at our best players at the Giants, so think of someone like Toby Green, he's got this um, really impressive search pattern that you can pick up from these glasses of what he looks at in a given period of time. And if I give that to someone who's not skilled, it's less than a quarter of the visual scope that he's got. So that was important for me coming from a non-AFL state, such as New South Wales, because I was looking for talent amongst a population that don't know how to spell AFL. So I'm going out to Western Sydney and I want to know, I could measure their speed, I could measure their ability to jump, I could measure their VO2 max, but now I can measure their ability to make decisions. But one of the things that I wasn't aware of from doing that was sleep impacts on your ability to make decisions. Now, that's in a sporting context, but intuitively, I also believe that also would impact on our day-to-day decisions. In fact, I believe we make dumb decisions when we're tired. And
Mm.
I think experience would probably tell most people that that's true. But yeah, we've got a long way to go in that study. But I think that where we're looking at that now is doing work in the area of concussion, which is very popular now, but eye movement is also impacted on things like concussion. So I wouldn't be surprised in the coming 2 to 3 years where you'll see games like AFL where players will be putting on Apple virtual reality goggles after they've had a head knock, and we'll be able to assess straight away where they're at with their visual. We'll be able to say to a player, you need more rest and recovery because you're not ready to do high involved complex tasks. We'll be doing that on work sites to make sure that the people that are working there are ready to go. I think we're moving into exciting times, and it's all through the eyes are going to tell us where we're at. So the link between decision making, things like conditions like concussion and brain health, they're all coming into one for me. And I'm looking forward to that side of things. I mean, I did a talk a week or so ago to a bunch of students, and I told them, I'm really envious of you. Like, I'm 58 now, and over the next 30 years, things are going to jump forward, which means that in 30 years, you'll be 48, and you guys are going to be at the forefront of this stuff. You're going to be driving it. And if I'm still here, God willing, I'll be some old fart sitting in a wheelchair watching you going, I knew this was going to. But I think things like that visual search, I think things like nanotechnology, like the stuff that we've got, like GPS units on players' backs and measuring, we're going to have that in just a thread now with nanotechnology. It'll be just in a thread. And we're measuring things from heart rate to sweat rate to whatever. It's all coming. It's an exciting future for anyone involved in science, but anyone involved in sport. If you think things are really whiz bang now because of that new app you've got on your Apple Watch, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah, I mean, the AFL would be excited about that because I know that these head knocks is a really big focus point for them at the moment. In fact, the first time, I'm not sure if you saw it the other night, I was watching Geelong playing. Who were they playing? It wasn't the Giants. That was the week before. Oh, they were playing Melbourne, and Gary Rowan accidentally knocked out Jeremy Cameron, both chasing the ball.
Yes, I
And
saw.
for the first time, the AFL said, okay, we're not going to replay this because it's quite graphic. They changed their mind after about 25 seconds. They said, okay, we'll show you a less graphic view of it.
Yeah.
But I thought, oh, that's really interesting take. Like there's obviously a lot of discussions happening at the AFL for a decision like that to be made, because for a lot of people, it's almost a drawing card, or at least it draws in highlight reels on YouTube. So the fact that there's technology like this, which is actually going to be able to be of benefit. I'm sure gets both players and those in control of the AFL pretty excited.
Oh, look, I think we're drawn to, it's almost like gladiatorial sports. We've been doing it for thousands of years, whether it was the Christians in Rome or whatever, coming through to now. And you look at Australian football, mate, the impacts. And like when I sit on the sideline in uh, rugby league, some of the boys at Penrith, mate, their biceps are bigger than my quads. They're massive, and they run into each other, at 10 meters per second. And I wince when they hit each other, and they just do it and get up laughing. You look at American football and the impacts that are going on there, and on it goes. Look, that's the entertainment value of sport. But the consequence of that, particularly with head knocks, I think we're only just starting to understand. And we're starting to see it show itself in things like dementia and Alzheimer's and these sort of things, conditions that are impacting the brain. And, we're going to start living, or we are living longer now than what we did even 20 years ago. The lifespan's getting greater. And yeah, we need to understand more about the brain. And I don't think I think we've respected it, but we've respected it from a removed position. We've got to really understand how this is, how it works, and what we can do to rehabilitate from injury knocks like Jeremy's got. And I think sport's come a long way.
Mm.
Mandatory time out from the game is a massive step forward. It used to be a badge of honour if you come back and played that game or in the next week. But it's not such a badge of honour when you're burying those people and they've got degenerative brain conditions that are likely linked to those gladiatorial head knocks.
Yeah, CTE, isn't it? Is
Mm.
I'm not sure if that's the only
That,
one. I'm sure you would know a heck of a lot more about this than me. But I watched a really sad documentary about an NFL player, which was the Alex Fernandez, I think his
yeah.
name was, and it was the first time I'd heard of CTE. I had no idea, and I still have very little understanding of NFL. But you watch some highlights and you can see how much impact's going on there. But just conversation around, things like head injuries, dementia. Dementia, I'm trying to think of this couple. It's an American couple, and I don't know their titles, but essentially they're committed to the study of dementia. And they were breaking down some of the facets of what can lead people down that road. And even though we're living a longer period, like I sort of touched on at the start, Peter Attia speaks about how so much of that longer life is not necessarily healthier. It's just we've learnt to be able to extend the duration of, sometimes it's healthier and sometimes it's just life.
Mm.
But they looked at things like exercise and diet. And one of the big standout points to me, Quinny, and I don't know, this is an interest point for you, but I've started to hear a lot about, the process that, first of all, that our processed foods go through, but even things like fruit and vegetables, some of the Roundup sprays and I think they call it glyphosate.
Mm-hmm.
They've started to look into the impacts on that, on things like cancer and just general health and well-being. And for me, as a guy who had thought he had his finger on the pulse of what good health was, it just seems to be a thousand miles deep, the tunnel of how it is that you can improve. Because even when you think you're eating a really good diet, I don't know how much of our food has glyphosate on it, but it seems that there's even more room for improvement where you probably didn't realize there was.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of it with going back on my own stuff. I decided I'd do more study because I was prescribed 27 different types of medication that I was going to have to take for the rest of my life. I didn't want to do that, and I thought there must be a more natural way to do this. So I did a postgrad cert in nutrition through Deakin University, and I wanted to go through Deakin and do it online because they wouldn't know anything about the encephalitis that I'd had and think, oh, the poor bugger will just put him through. But I also wanted to be able to retain the information because I had issues with memory and recall. So having to do a formulated study where I could be assessed and I either knew it or I didn't and got through. So, I've got a couple of degrees on my wall, but the one I'm probably proudest of most is my postgrad in nutrition, just because it represents far more than just doing a course at university. But I'm quite convinced that the long-term implications of refined foods is not going to be happy reading for us. And in fact, I think future generations will look back and go, "What were those guys thinking? Like fancy eating that or doing that?" And I think another area too will be that the whole DNA around nutrition. And I think if you are from, say, I'm Irish background, Irish heritage, where we've been eating carbohydrates for more than 2,000 years with all the potatoes and everything else. I think my nutritional needs and base is very different to one of the West African athletes that I'm coaching that have really had a high protein and a very simple carbohydrate diet and water, for pretty much their whole existence. And then suddenly you introduce them to these different foods. And I even look at Indigenous Australians up until white settlement here in Australia, their diet would be significantly different. And what we think of as weight sometimes is bloating, and bloating comes from infection. And I think that we're killing ourselves sometimes with food. We've got to be
Yeah.
careful. It's a whole new area coming. Well, it's already here, but it's an area of great great potential, I think.
Yeah. One thing that was really interesting for me when my wife was teaching, for a couple of years, she went out to an Aboriginal community called Yallala in South Australia.
I've heard of
and
it.
she said, as soon as she got there, one of the most standout features was your welfare payment would come through. And there was a local milk bar, which was taking the piss on prices, essentially, because they knew that a lot of the community would spend it. And so many of the people, Jesse was explaining, they don't have the same value on money as what like a Australian society has at the moment. They're not as obsessed with this idea of a big house. They just want to go down, use their money, and they would buy Coke and they would buy processed food. And it was just I guess a lack of education. But she said one thing that was it was just really sad to see. First of all, how they were just taken advantage of from the locals who had a business idea, and they knew that the welfare money that was coming in would just go out just as quickly. But then she also said it was not uncommon just to see money laying around on the street because people would sit down. They didn't really have an appreciation for what it was. They didn't look at it in the same way that you and I would, as though it's like this treasured commodity that had to be taken care of. And it is interesting, like that whole conversation of just going back to a natural diet, whether it's here in Australia or American Indians or wherever it is that you look. There's so many benefits that come with being able to store food for a longer period of time. But I guess that's the flip side of it as well. People, lose that relationship with food, which I can imagine like the Aboriginal world would have been super in touch with.
Yes, yeah. No, I think it's, I think I really believe we've got to go back to getting back into that wholesome stuff. But, the reality of life and economies of scale and big business don't know how that'll happen. So at the end of the day, you've just got to take responsibility for your own life and your own choices. And it comes back to what you just said about education. It's education, but I think as much in your story before, it's as much about opportunity and what you've got as it is about the education side. It's having the opportunity or choice, and sometimes they don't get the choice. And the bigger markup or the bigger value is in highly processed foods. They can. It's probably cheaper to ship you in a can of Coke than just give you a bottle of water.
Yeah. One of the things I've been learning about a lot recently is just seed oils and how it's contained within everything. I went down and bought a thing of butter the other day, and it said on the front it was spreadable. I've never really bought butter. I've only just developed a little bit of a taste for it. But I was looking at the container, and it said it was spreadable, but it said it was organic. And I got home, and 30% of it was like a canola oil. And even me, who I got fooled by the organic label, thinking, oh, okay, if we're going to do butter, we'll do the organic version. Then you get it home, it's not even like most of it, or at least a good portion of it's not even the thing that you thought you were buying.
Yes, yeah. No, it can be a challenge, but they're things for us to move forward. And in the world I work, it's about making sure that the athletes I've got understand that. But I'm probably lucky in a way that I've got a number of athletes in my squad that have come from a very impoverished background, and they're from Africa and different parts of Asia where they haven't had access to a lot of money and a lot of foods like this, and they'd no sooner go to McDonald's and have a Big Mac than they would, walk naked down the street. They wouldn't even cross their mind, and they just look for their right foods of what they've got. But it's about I've got to catch myself sometimes because it's pretty easy to start your day off with a coffee and a biscuit rather than something that's a bit more holistic and wholesome.
Yeah, before I let you go, Quinny, I'll tell you, I used to train with a Sudanese guy called Dua Yowa, and he moved to Australia, I want to say when he was about 10 or 11 from Khartoum in Kenya, in Sudan. He had a really wild story about how it was that they got out of there. Just things that you can't even imagine. But in terms of relationship to food, I remember living in Ballarat one day and we were driving down to do a really difficult workout. We had 8x1K with a minute recovery that night. And it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And he said, "Oh, man, I'm so hungry. I wish I ate before we came." And I said, "Oh, like, what have you eaten today?" He goes, "No, I haven't eaten since yesterday." And for me, it was unbelievable that was even an option. So you talk about the relationship with food. And for him, I knew his family pretty well. It wasn't uncommon for them. And not because they were poor anymore or they were struggling. It was just so how they had lived growing up that it didn't really even cross their mind that, hey, it's breakfast, it's lunch, it's dinner.
Yeah, well, they're so used to that. But see, I bet he's changed now. He would have adopted this a Western life. I one of the more, sometimes you get a lesson and you don't think there's nothing there to get. I went to India for cricket and I worked with the Indian Cricket League for a while, and I was with the team from Bangladesh. About 3 months, I was working with the team from Bangladesh, and I was in this tuk-tuk with this day with one of the players, and this poor Indian was pedaling his little tuk-tuk thing along, and there's a little boy. He's probably about 8 or 9, and he's yep, 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 yep. And the tuk-tuk drivers telling whatever. And I said to the Bangladesh guy with me, "What's he saying?" He's saying he's telling him to piss off, and and but the kid kept coming back, and I loved his persistence. This kid, we got caught in the traffic, and this kid, and they're going for it, and this little boy's arguing with him, and I said, "What's he saying to him?" And he said, "Well, the driver's saying if he doesn't go away, he's going to get off and hit him." And the little boy's saying back to him, "You do your job and I'll do mine." And the sad thing about that, as we went on in the traffic, I thought that little boy's job is a beggar. And I reckon if I went back to New Delhi today, I'd probably find him there, because that's his limitations, and his options of life is so narrow. His job is to target foreigners to get money. I remember putting my hand in my pocket and I gave him the equivalent of $20, which was probably a month's salary. And I just slipped it into his hand and he disappeared back off into the bloody crowd of minions. But I'll never forget that. You do your, I'll do mine.
Yeah, far out. Said with a whole heap of cheek as well. Quinny, I could talk to you all day, but I'm going to let you go because I know you've got to get down and look after your athletes.
I do.
Mate, thanks so much for coming back on. Always great to chat.
No, I hope it wasn't too deep and philosophical and all, but no, always great to chat, mate, and all the best. If there's something here that's triggered the interests of anybody, please make contact through my website. I'll get back to you for sure.
Yeah, all right. I'll link that in the description for anyone interested. All right, Quinny, I'll leave you to it. See you later, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Awesome.